Okay, so I've said previously that the iron triangle metaphor for explaining the relationship between interest groups, Congress, and bureaucracy isn't quite as accurate as we would like, and that's why you've seen the rise of the issue network metaphor. However, the iron triangle still is a great way to explain the interplay between those three political actors, so let's spend a little time looking at it. Okay, the iron triangle, also known as a sub-government or cozy government, cozy government, is a relationship between special interest groups, Congress, and the bureaucracy. So first off, what is the relationship between interest groups and Congress? The first thing that interest groups do is provide support to members of Congress, or more specifically, members of the congressional committee that are concerned with their policy area. This type of election support, or this type of election support, is known as electioneering. This can take the form of get-out-the-vote campaigns, campaign contributions, running advertisements in the form of 527s, or perhaps making contributions to super PACs that benefit the member of Congress. But whatever it is, it's providing support, electoral support, to those members of Congress. Now, in exchange, what the special interest group is going to want is they're going to want friendly legislation. They're going to want legislation passed that benefits that special interest group. The special interest group will continue to interact with Congress through a process known as lobbying, by providing information to members of Congress, to those decision makers, to inform them of the special interest group's needs. Now, a common misconception is that lobbyists lie. Well, they really don't, because if a lobbyist is to be persuasive, you can't be persuasive and be known as a liar. So lobbyists that are good will present factually correct information to members of Congress, but it's always put in or couched in terms of what is beneficial for the group. So while it's not necessarily a lie, sometimes it may not be the whole truth. Really good lobbyists will present information to members of congressional committees in a way that helps the member understand how passage of the legislation is actually beneficial to the member and his or her constituency. Okay, the relationship between special interest groups and the bureaucracy. Again, the special interest group will lobby the bureaucracy. Oftentimes people think of lobbying as only being with special interest groups in Congress. In reality, special interest groups do lobby Congress, but they also lobby the bureaucracy. This is because the bureaucracy possesses rule-making power, or the power to make public policy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. So special interest groups will give their policy preferences, make their policy preferences known to decision makers inside a bureaucratic agency. They will also defend the agency whenever the agency comes under attack in Congress. Let's say, for example, Congress is considering reorganizing parts of the federal bureaucracy or cutting an agency's budget. Well, then the special interest groups that are served by that agency will naturally want to defend that agency in front of Congress or in front of various congressional committees. So this creates kind of a dependent relationship between the bureaucratic agency and the special interest group. The special interest group wants in return low regulation or lax regulation, and they want administrative regulations drawn up that benefit the special interest group. The relationship between the bureaucracy and Congress. Congress makes law, makes public policy in the form of statutory law, but does not execute it. Furthermore, Congress lacks often the technical expertise to make policy in great detail, so they rely upon the bureaucracy to carry out their laws, to execute their laws, and to inform them, to provide information to them about how these various policies, these statutes that they've created, are actually being effectively enforced, or if they are in fact effective. The bureaucracy, of course, then relies upon Congress to provide it with its funding. So that's kind of the relationship between those three political actors. There's another look at it. You could search the internet and you can come up with all sorts of diagrams, but essentially they say the same thing, explaining these relationships between these three political actors. Some key pieces of legislation to know about when thinking about the bureaucracy. First would be the Pendleton Act, also sometimes known as the Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. This gets passed during the Progressive period in an attempt to clean up the bureaucracy or the civil service system. We want to depoliticize it, to move away from the spoils or patronage system and to move toward a merit-based system. Originally, under the Pendleton Act, only around 10% of the federal workforce would be appointed based upon merit. However, today, about 90+% of federal workers are appointed based upon the concept of merit. With the merit system, how do we determine whether someone's qualified for a specific position? Usually what happens is there's some sort of test that's given, and then the person, whenever the hiring person, what they will do is they'll take the top 3 scores and they'll interview those individuals, and then they'll offer one the job. Not all positions are done this way. Some positions are done with reviewing an individual's qualification and determining a score based upon experience, education, and the like. But the whole idea is that we want to appoint people based upon merit, not based upon who they supported in the last election. So the Pendleton Act is significant in that it begins the process of moving away from a spoils or patronage system into a merit-based system. Another piece of legislation to be concerned with would be the Hatch Act. The Hatch Act is going to, again, continue this process of trying to depoliticize the federal workforce by prohibiting federal workers from being involved in partisan political activity. So federal workers are able to vote, they're able to engage in free speech, but they cannot be involved in, or cannot be actively involved in partisan political activity. They cannot hold, for example, an office in a political party. So we want to try to insulate the federal workforce from all the politics that goes on in terms of administering federal policy. Next concept is going to be legislative oversight. So let's go ahead and define that term. Legislative oversight is the ability of Congress to look over the bureaucracy to determine, is the bureaucracy being effective in implementing the policy through statutory law that Congress has passed. Congress possesses various what I'll call tools of legislative oversight. Perhaps the easiest one to understand is money. Congress controls the checkbook. Congress has the power of the purse, the saying goes. Congress will tend to fund those things that it likes and will tend to defund those things that it doesn't like. So the fact that Congress controls the money, Congress can dictate or can manage or manipulate bureaucratic operations. So Congress funds each individual agency. They fund the specific programs in each agency. It's not that Congress gives a lump sum to the president or a lump sum to each department. Congress can specify in great detail what the appropriation that each agency gets can be used for. So in that manner, Congress has a lot of say over what each agency does. Another tool that Congress has is through hearings. Occasionally, the standing committees in the House and Senate will conduct hearings or investigations into bureaucratic performance. And it's usually a good idea if you're a bureaucrat to try to steer clear of those if you can, because if there's going to be a hearing, it's usually not too terribly good for you. It means something got screwed up, and it's not going to be a good day for anyone whenever the secretary of whatever department has to go testify in front of a specific committee. They're not going to ask any fun questions. So what you want to do is you want to run your department in a manner that kind of flies beneath the radar, because when Congress starts holding hearings, bad things start happening in the bureaucracy. Structure. Congress has created the structure of the entire federal bureaucracy. Nothing is really specified in terms of the bureaucracy in the Constitution. Rather, all agencies have been created by Congress. And again, I want to emphasize that while the president is the chief executive and runs the federal bureaucracy, or at least theoretically runs the federal bureaucracy, it is in fact Congress who defines its structure. So there are 15 major subdivisions in the executive branch. Why are there 15 major subdivisions? Well, the simple answer is because Congress said so. Congress decides what agencies go inside of each subdivision, and Congress can decide what each agency is responsible for. Congress creates agencies, Congress can combine agencies, and Congress can eliminate agencies. To assist Congress in supervising the bureaucracy, Congress has created 2 agencies that work for it. These are the Government Accountability Office, formerly known as the General Accounting Office, and the Congressional Budget Office. These two agencies are part of Congress. They're not part of the bureaucracy. And what they do is they help Congress get an independent view as to over the performance of the various bureaucratic agencies. The Government Accountability Office is responsible for going out and doing performance reviews of various agencies. Is the policy working? Is the policy producing the desired results? Is the policy being faithfully carried out? And then you have the Congressional Budget Office, which analyzes budget requests that are submitted by various agencies to determine are those budget requests in line with what the agency actually needs. The CBO also does some fiscal policy stuff in terms of, what will a tax program do for or do to the economy, what will spending programs do for the economy. But in this role of legislative oversight is primarily concerned about the spending patterns of each bureaucratic agency. Legislative veto. A legislative veto is the ability of one or both houses of Congress to overturn or invalidate or veto a specific administrative regulation. Bureaucratic agencies are given by Congress the authority to make administrative regulations. Congress has decided to reserve for itself the power to overturn or veto these regulations through the use of the legislative veto. The legislative veto takes two basic forms, a one-house legislative veto and a two-house legislative veto. A one-house legislative veto is where one house by itself would have the authority to overturn a bureaucratic regulation. A two-house legislative veto is when both houses would have to act to overturn a bureaucratic regulation. The court case of INS, or Immigration Naturalization Service, versus Chadha, in that case, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the one-house legislative veto was unconstitutional. In that case, the court did not really rule on the idea of the legislative veto or the two-house legislative veto. What they did was say that the one-house legislative veto was unconstitutional. Even though the court didn't really rule on the two-house legislative veto, its constitutionality is somewhat questionable. So the question we now ask is, does legislative oversight work, or why doesn't it work? Most observers would say that legislative oversight is only somewhat effective. Congress, while it does control the money, can't really cut an agency's budget. Well, yes, legally, in legal theory, it can, but in reality, it can't because of the special interest groups that will defend that agency. Can Congress create new agencies or rearrange the executive branch? Yes, it can, but in reality, doing so is very difficult. Can Congress overturn cannot Congress overturn administrative regulations? Well, yes, they can. They can do this with the legislative veto. They can also pass a law that would also overturn that regulation, but does Congress have the actual technical expertise to know whether that would actually, in fact, be good or bad? And that in itself is questionable.